Hey everybody, Hollywoodpizza here. We're going to jump into some news items of the week. I'm joined by Hamhocks42. How are you doing, Hamhocks?
Hey man, I'm doing very well. I'm excited to jump into this. We have a little bit of news to discuss. We have some announcements and things that we're going to be diving into a little bit, and we're going to discuss some new Capenna action, which I got to say I've got some thoughts on. So I'm looking forward to that very much.
Oh yeah, always exciting with some new cards, and it's actually pretty cool that we had an event this weekend where we actually got to see some of the new cards in action. So let's jump right into that, and that's Stream League 11. So in our top 8, we actually had a couple Naya Runes decks in the finals. We also had a Jund mid-range, a Jund Werewolves, Boros aggro, a couple of Esper mid-range decks, and a Mardu mid-range. Hammer, Naya Runes still tier 1.
Yep, it's still here, and it never went anywhere. The funny thing is, there were a couple weeks there where it looks like, oh, the format's been solved. Naya Runes isn't the answer, but no, it's this little deck just refuses to be denied. It's incredibly powerful. It can rebuild very quickly from really aggressive board states. It's shocking too. Like I find that deck especially fascinating because it runs so little removal or any kind of interaction. It just doesn't need it. And when you can consistently beat your opponent down with like trampling, life linking 8/8s and 9/9s by like turn 5. Like, what more do you need? It's great. And we see it here where even though the new Capenna cards are out, they're available. People are experimenting with them, and we did see quite a few new Capenna cards in this top 8, which is really cool and very promising for the future of Standard. Because this event, Streaming 11, hosted by the One Jam, was actually put on only what 5 days after the set released. There's
Mm-hmm.
like within the first week. So we're looking at these are experimental decks or experimental changes that people are bringing. And in some cases, it's not surprising. We're seeing existing decks with a few new Capenna cards added to them, or we're just seeing old standards like the Naya Runes list. But we did see some good stuff in here. We did see Obnixilus show up in a couple of lists. Tenacious Underdog is apparently the truth. That showed up in a couple lists as well.
That card's
Like
great.
it's
Just
so good.
such a great card. Like
Yeah.
solid overall, solid stats. Just
Hmm.
keeps coming back.
Keeps
First
coming
time I
back
read
in.
that card, I was like, wow, yeah, that's a player.
Yeah, first time I read it, I remember thinking like, it escapes for 4. Is that or blitzes out of the graveyard for 4? Is that and you have to lose life to do it? Do you really want to do that? Then I realized it hits your opponent for 3 out of the graveyard and then draws you a card. Yeah, that's freaking
Mm-hmm.
amazing. Let's go. Um, but yeah, so this metagame, I'm intrigued by the changes that we're seeing, like the Jund werewolves, Jund midrange lists. I mean, Jund is really having a time in the spotlight right now, and I think New Capenna was a big part of that, and that's exciting for sure. But at the end of the day, Naya Runes was 1 and 2. They took it, they took the 1 and 2 spot. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, the deck is great. It's just
Oh
incredibly
yeah.
strong. It's solid. And we've seen it get devoured in the past by especially decks like Mono White Aggro. Like Mono White Aggro has a great matchup against Naya Runes, especially when it's running Archon of Emeria and things like that. But we saw very few Mono White players jump into this tournament,
One.
and as a
Only
result,
one.
there's only one. So the Naya Runes list had kind of a wide open field of favorable matchups, presumably because that's how they ended up on top, right? Um, yeah, I'm fascinated by this deck, to be honest, because it's week to week. It can be the best performing deck that nobody can touch, or it can be like a footnote in the middle of the pack. Like it's like it varies, but this week, right out the gate, it was very strong.
Oh yeah, it's definitely taken down some of our events, and it shows up quite frequently. In terms of like the most popular decks, we actually saw Esper Control with 8 players, Jund with 5 players, Naya Runes with 3 players. So 2 of those players ended up making the finals. Zoria's Tempo, Orzhov midrange, and a slew of other decks with 2 people playing them, and kind of like all higher to lower win percentages. The decks with the best win percentages, we got the Naya Runes, Boros aggro, Mardu midrange, 4-color Reanimator, and Grixis Control. So lots of different decks in this tournament. Lots of different decks in the top 8. I think that it's interesting to see, how even a new set, even though we can arguably say that when new sets come in, they rotate the cards that are already in. Even
Sure.
we see it in standard, alchemy, things like that. But at the same time, the fact that Capenna is making new decks and adding cards to existing decks means that it's definitely like a healthy set and strong overall. And guess what, Hammer? A non-Ob Nixilis deck won the tournament, and I called that in last week's news. So,
That's true. That's true. So, and you know, surprise, surprise. Honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised either way. I find Obnixilis to be a fascinating card because, like, now that it's here in the meta and people are seeing it live on the ladder and people have crafted it, of course, and the debate continues. There's still some people who are saying it's the most busted thing since Oko, or maybe even worse than Oko, and there are other people saying it's the most overrated card of all time. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. But exactly where on that spectrum, I'm not sure yet. I mean, it's still very powerful. It's still very good, and we are seeing it represented in these Jund decks, especially at the top of the standings here. But is it like? Yeah,
I think the best deck hasn't been created yet for that
you're probably
card.
Right on that.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Where you want to be with it. Someone out there is probably gonna find it, but I think that the best deck is just not there yet for it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the Asika's Chariot Obnixilis combo is definitely strong. There's no question about it. But I feel like it is very similar to the Asika's Chariot Ren and 7 combo in that it is very powerful, but it is a late game strategy, and you can win the game before you get there in a lot of situations. So I think leaning heavily on that as your win con is setting yourself up to be disappointed, in my opinion. Like, I don't think it's quite there. I think it's a strong combo when it works. Yeah. But I don't. Yeah, I think
that Ob by itself is like strong with the other black creatures, like the Underdog, the Eye Twitch, things like that, where I lost a game earlier playing my fight rigging deck. So you can find Naya Rune's gameplay and my fight rigging deck on this channel as well. But essentially they went like turn 3 Obnixilis, turn 4 Obnixilis with both casualtied. And yeah, that was pretty much the end of the game because they're like,
brutal,
plussing, making tokens, and the game kind of just slowly slipped out of control because I was out of cards or I was at 8 life, and yeah, didn't end well.
Oh, and the thing about having multiple obs is you can downtick the main Obnixilis, the non-token copy, to create the devil token, and then casualty the other Obnixilis in your hand using the devil token. And that produces that can get 3 obs on board in one go around. I actually did. I had a match where I was playing with Obnixilis, and I actually resolved 3 obs on my opponent. There was one point where I had 4 of them on the battlefield. It's like, this is just unfair. Like, this is like, it was brutal.
Yeah,
it was like crazy top decks, but still, like that's not typical. Like, yeah, I assure you,
totally.
But like those fringe cases happen, and when you have that much hate on your opponent's hand and their life total every turn, like, it's just too much to deal with. Yeah,
and then it's man, that's the rack is a funny card. The rack is a really funny card, and Obnixilis kind of just does the rack but better. It's mythic rack. Vibe.
Yeah. One thing though, while we're still kind of on the topic of the Stream League tournament, I have to say, huge shout out to Elliot Dragon for bringing 4-color Reanimator, and it's running. And like, actually, when we were doing our set review, you asked me, is Titan of Industry the best new Reanimator target? This deck has 4 Titan of Industry in it.
Yeah, card so like, is great.
The answer is yes. Yes, Titan of Industry is a phenomenal Reanimator target. Just go grab it. Yeah.
Can you imagine if it had Lifelink?
Oh.
Or like if it had just one more ability? I don't know what ability it would have, but.
The other thing, Vigilance. Let's go. Let's go Elder Gargaroth 2.0. Let's just
that card is just solid. It's
just great.
Huge fan of it. Just not to toot our own horns, but I think our top 10 list was actually pretty solid.
I think so too,
had a lot of playable cards so far and constructed. So
well, and I've gone back and like built with decks with a handful of those cards. I gotta say they're all pretty solid in their own way.
Oh yeah. But let's go ahead and touch on a few other news items before we actually deep dive into some more new Streets of New Capenna. So we had the MTG Arena announcements as well come out. This was actually today, including the complete rebalancing of Alchemy. So in the article itself, you're going to find all the events that are happening this month, including the Arena Open, which is actually next weekend. And don't forget, if you scrub out of that, you can actually jump into our event on the 15th, which is free to play. It's going to be Alchemy Best of 3. But in terms of the alchemy rebalancing as well, while we're on that topic, we have City Stalker Connoisseur making it so that now it says non-land. So if you or your opponent are playing with that card and one of you has lands left and it gets cast, no longer is it going to make you discard the last card that you have. If it's just a land, you get to keep it, play your lands. Somewhat of a big deal, especially considering that the Connoisseur can get out of control against specific decks that kind of empty their hand quick. Another good card that got changed was Painful Bond. So instead of it saying mana value 3 or greater, it's 3 or less. So essentially they're punishing Lurrus decks and incentivizing players to play with mana values that are higher.
Yeah, and I think this is a very significant change. I think that, I mean, it changes the way the card functions on a fundamental level. Like, I don't think we're going to go through all of the alchemy changes today because there were a number of them. Many of them are very minor, and to be honest, I don't believe they're going to actually change the way the card is played. This one, I think, will. I think that this makes a very significant difference. I think we're going to see mid-range decks or even control decks that have a higher top end, like these Discover the Formula, like Demir or Esper style decks, maybe lean more into Painful Bond where they were avoiding it previously because it punished them so much for having these expensive cards in their hand. Whereas now it's kind of a free roll in those decks where it used to be a free roll in these Lurrus decks that are just vomiting their hand out on the battlefield and by turn 4 are out of gas and need to reload. And Painful Bond was incredibly powerful for those decks because it almost never actually resulted in life loss, in my experience anyway. I played Painful Bond in a couple of like low to the ground, black aggro or like um like Lurrus enchantment style decks, and Painful Bond was phenomenal in those decks. Like absolutely fantastic. And I don't think it's going to fit particularly well now because if you're running out 2 or 3 spells a turn, if all of those are pinging you now, and if your opponent bounces them, they ping you again when you cast them the second
Yeah, it's
time. Like,
perpetual.
yeah, that's rough. That could be really bad. So I love this change. I think it's a very interesting one, and it makes the card it changes the card. I think it is equally as good, but a different deck wants it now, which I think is kind of interesting.
Trying to hurt the Lurrus decks as much as we can without banning Lurrus in Historic yet.
Yeah, I know. We'll see how long that takes.
Yeah. The next card that got rebalanced was a card that actually got banned in Standard that they nerfed a bit here with the Scry 1, and then now they're changing back the draw card, and that's our good friend Omnath, Locus of Creation, one of my favorite cards ever. I think the 5 mana still is what restricts it. I think that, honestly, if you just make it 4 mana, again, I really think that what made this card broken were the Triomes and the Ultimatums and the adventure cards, just all the other cards that were broken, and some of them were banned, like the Wilds, Escape to the Wilds.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you
yeah,
got
I don't
Escape
know.
to the Wilds. Escape to the Wilds allowed for extra land drops. You had Fabled Passage, which allowed for extra land drops. You had Genesis Ultimatum. None of those are legal in Alchemy. So yeah, what would Omnath look like if it was 4 color now? I don't know. That's a really good question.
I guess the Cabaretti Triome makes it more playable, but
sure.
I don't know what your big high-end slam dunk card is, right?
Yeah,
like
what's the card that puts? I mean, we have what, Storm the Festival? Like that could put 2 lands on the battlefield. I mean, that's fine. Like if you got a Shia down, things could get wacky, but like
that's true
I've been
too.
kind of
Like
okay
the
with
fetch
that.
lands aren't the best. Like there is no more Fabled. You don't necessarily like get to do as many free things as you used to do. You got to work for it a little bit more, So I don't know.
That
We'll
would,
see.
I don't know. It'd be interesting, but I can appreciate them giving the cantrip back, giving the card draw back, because I think they realize like, they're looking at the alchemy stats and like, oh, people aren't playing Omnath. We thought this card was completely busted. And it's like, well,
It's
maybe
the
it
other
wasn't as
cards
bad
that
as we
were
thought.
busted. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
the
think
cards that made it broken, right? Because it's usually a lot of the time it's almost like the enablers more than like the payoffs. The payoffs are there, but the enablers are like 1 and 2 mana. And those are the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a ton of landfall support in those earlier sets. Kind of incidental landfall support. Like I don't think Fabled Passage was designed with knowing that like these Zendikars coming, we're gonna have landfall. Maybe I can be mistaken. They may have planned that out, but I think you're right. I think Omnath's power, like Omnath's moment in the sun, was because of the cards around it. And yeah, you're exactly right. Right now in Alchemy, like Omnath is cool. You can do some neat things with it. We still have cards like Evolving Wilds. We also have the new fetch lands from New Capenna. the ones that
Yeah,
sacrifice
the
the moment
sack
they drop.
lands. Yeah,
Like maybe those have a chance to make some waves here. I don't know that, but at the end of the day, like yeah, I think the card is in a much safer position than it used to be. That's for sure. So yeah.
definitely. So that you can check out all the links
Hmm.
in the description below for all the information in terms of the arena announcements plus the alchemy rebalance. Overall, Hammer. Let's dive right into it. What are your first
Do
impressions
it.
of New Capenna? How do you feel about the set?
You know,
What are the cards
yeah.
that impress you the most?
I gotta say, I do think we hit some pretty good stuff with our top 10 list. Now we didn't get everything, like, but at the same time, I feel like we pegged a lot of like. I'm kind of. I think we should be patting ourselves on the back a little bit. I think we did a good job with it. Like we knew Ab was gonna be strong. Like
Mm-hmm.
Ab is strong. No way. Like a 3-mana, like 2 3-mana planeswalkers that come down simultaneously, that like punish your opponent for having cards like or like having
It
it's
sounds
insane.
unreal. That sounds unreal.
It's
You
crazy.
would think that you're like, there's no
Yeah.
way that card ever gets printed. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like,
it's one of those. I was as I was reading it, it's like there must be something about casualty I'm not picking up on. Like, what's the downside? Where's the catch? And it's like, no, there isn't one. It's just great. Yeah. So we no surprise. Ob is fantastic. We've seen a lot of it, but at the same time, I'm seeing plenty of decks that are not running Ob. Just like we were seeing in
mm-hmm.
the on the ladder, it's not Ob Nixilis all day, top to bottom, which is great. I'm so glad to see that because to be honest, I was really expecting it to just be the Ob Nixilis show the moment the card dropped because during early access which I did have the good fortune of participating in with a little bit of pestering. Hey, everybody, just go ahead and be the squeaky wheel. It gets greased sometimes. Sometimes. But anyway, sorry, that's a whole nother topic. I did see Obnixilis a lot. People were experimenting with it a ton, which is understandable because it's the new hotness.
Mm-hmm.
But the ladder hasn't quite reflected that yet, which I think is good. Also, there are some cards that we didn't touch on that I do think are incredibly strong. Well, once we did touch on, I need to get it out of the way. Fight rigging. Fight
Oh,
rigging is the truth. It's so
oh,
good.
I love fight rigging. Check out that
Just do
video
it.
on our channel.
Right?
It
Yes.
just dropped. So it dropped last
Check that
night.
out.
So check it out.
If
Yeah,
you're
I
in
love
Jund,
that.
if you're in Jund, run it with Shakedown Heavy. If you're in Bant, run it with Reservoir Kraken. If you're an Esprit, run it with Reservoir Kraken. Like just do it.
Our
Like
version was
or
Soul
not.
Tie, so
Sorry,
we
but
played
Sultai.
the
Yes.
heavy plus the Kraken, and we had the payoffs being like Toxrill, Coma, Titan of Industry, which was our number 2 card.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
I
so
mean,
beautiful. I love it.
just great stuff going on. I love
Yeah.
Rafine.
Yes.
Rafine's like, I'm just so high on that
Rafine's
card,
the
and
shit.
the Esper decks right now are like these Esper tempo beatdown decks, and yeah, those are showing up a lot. So the fact that New Capenna hasn't necessarily pushed any decks out of the way, instead it's created new decks and added
Mm-hmm.
on to existing decks. I think that's great, and you're right. I'm not sure if it's like I said earlier, the best Omnat deck isn't created yet, but or best Ob
Nixilis,
Nixilis
yeah.
deck isn't been created yet, but we're not seeing it as Oko-y as it seems. When it's broken, it's
Yeah.
broken, and when it's not, right? Like it's
You're
kind of
right.
bad, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. When you are sitting on turn 3 with an Obnixilis in your hand and no body on the board, and your opponent's got 2 creatures down, the last thing you want to do is drop Obnixilis because it's just
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna get 1 ping or 1 devil, and then it's gonna get smoked. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
But on the turns when you hit the Tenacious Underdog on 2, and your opponent doesn't play any creatures out, and maybe like foretells a card or cycles something, like spends their like if they're tapped out on turn 3 and you got a Tenacious Underdog, you're smacking them for 3 and you're getting double obs. Like you feel like $1 million, and that's really hard to deal with. So it's like it's one or the other. Or if you get, if you get the Chariot Ob combo going, if Ob goes unanswered for 2 turns, you're in a world of hurt.
Oh
Like
yeah.
that's what it comes down to. And there are very few cards that once Ob hits the board, there are very few cards that can deal with it. Yeah, and even once it's on the stack, you can usually deal with one of them, but not the other. It's pretty brutal. Yeah, so I mean the card is good, but I don't know that it's great. But yeah, like fight rigging is the truth. Another one, Rafine is fantastic, and I
Yeah,
love the
Rafine's
fact
up there.
Rafine is so good that there are mono white aggro players that are splashing 2 colors for him. That's bonkers. Like it's
Yeah, that's out of control. I told you what happened though. I
yeah,
said I
right.
could see mono white as I read the card the first time while we were doing the spoilers,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, the more I read it, I was like, Hammer, the more I read this card, I was like, this card's like insane, right? I was like, it just
Yeah.
does so much. The main text on that card is a lot of the time it's whenever this creature attacks. It's whenever a creature attacks.
A creature. Yep.
So it doesn't even matter.
Huge
Like you attack
difference.
with 4 creatures, and all of a sudden you're conniving 4, putting 4 counters on something, and putting 4 counters on Rafine, and the game's just
Yeah.
like slowly ending.
Well, and
And
on top
Ward
of
1's
that,
no joke, right?
Ward one is very legitimate. Like it's one of those little details that because it throws your opponent off curve. That's
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't protect Rafine perfectly, but if your opponent wants to hit it with a Faithful Absence or an Infernal Grasp, they need to spend 3 on it. That prevents them from hitting those double spells on turn 4 or turn 5 even in some cases. Like it throws them off curve if they want to take it out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
on the draw, do you play Kiki, do you play Fabled, or do you kill the Rafine, right? Because let's say you kill
right,
the
exactly.
Rafine, so you spend your whole turn, you kill the Rafine while they're tapped down, then they just play another one, and then you don't have a
Yep.
backup removal, and then you're like, all right, I guess I'll play my Fabled, and even though Fabled's really powerful, the Esper deck can have a removal spell for your Kiki when it flips, or they're just going to bury you in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like, card selection. They're going to hit what they need, and then continue to put more presence on the board. I mean, yeah, that card's just when I first read
Well,
it, I'm telling you, that 4
right.
toughness is what really pushes that card over
Oh
the
my
top.
goodness.
Like,
There's so many little things about that card that push it over the edge. Like
mhm.
so many of those little details add up to make an incredibly powerful card. And like one of the other cool things is once Rafine is on the battlefield, if you're running destroy removal, there's a good chance that the other player has effectively 7 copies of Rafine in their deck because
Mhm.
Obscura Charm can bring it back from the graveyard
Yep.
at instant speed.
That's really
It's
good.
gross. It's so
It's
good.
really good.
I love it. I love it. I can't
Um
get enough of it. I'm telling you.
we've
I think
also seen
Rafine's
Rafine
fantastic.
in the Planeswalker decks too. The same
Yep.
deck that you had a video on the channel as
Yeah,
well, one that
the
took
Esper.
down our one of our PTQs.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
the Esper
was
Planeswalker deck is quite good. Yeah,
oh
and
yeah.
yeah, Rafine fits in that perfectly. Because Rafine provides one of the things that those controlling decks struggle with. I mean, not necessarily the Esper Planeswalker deck was doing fine, but one of the things that those decks struggle with a lot of the time is closing the game out. Getting enough aggression on the opponent while controlling the board. That's kind of the challenge whenever in any control deck, actually. But Rafine just kind of gets around that because it's like I'm gonna smooth out your hand, gonna give you exactly what you need. Oh, and I'm gonna grow, and the whole team is gonna grow while we're doing it. And especially in situations where you have like Wolf creating double tokens, and you've got the Wandering Emperor and Kaito all producing tokens, like you're gonna have by the time Rafine is swinging, you could be swinging with 3 or 4 bodies, one of which is conniving for 3 or 4. Like
Oh yeah.
so good. It's bonkers. Like, yeah, it's the card's great. Like, the card's absolutely great. Another one of the guild leaders or family heads that we haven't talked about and we didn't touch on in our top 10 video that I think is actually pretty darn good. And I've been playing a little bit of is Falco Spara, the Bant leader.
Okay. Yeah, the
That card,
brokers.
yeah, the broker's family head. Because it's a 3/3 flying trampler for 4 that enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it, and it effectively unlocks the top of your library. The moment you add that with Broker's Ascendancy and or Luminarch Aspirant, the amount of counters that you're putting on your team is disgusting. And as a result, you can basically cast whatever you want off the top of your library, as long as you got the mana for it.
So,
So
do you
yeah.
think brokers? I was thinking brokers is almost one of the families that it's like underrepresented. Like,
Hmm.
you can play fight rigging and boring collects in those decks, and I feel like you can really push those counters up there.
Oh yeah.
Another speaking of like fight rigging, another card I want to play with it is Goro Goro.
Ooh,
Just
okay.
because you're able to make some dragons, and then the dragons can kind of maybe trigger your fight rigging in a couple turns as well if you get that going.
That's cool.
A
And
lot of like
anything that you
different stuff.
Yeah, and anything you hit off fight rig, you can give haste to. I like
Oh
that.
yeah,
That's
that's true too.
yeah,
Yeah, yep. You can kind of
that's
just
pretty
like jump
slick.
right in.
Yep.
Speaking of what to hit off of fight rigging, a card that we mentioned just a few moments ago, Tina Industry. Now that card
Yeah.
is the real deal.
So
I'm
good.
so happy to see that card getting played. When I first read it, I was like, "Yep." I feel like it's a card that a few years ago we'd be like, "Oh, this is kind of like an EDH card," but nowadays
Right.
it does so much more that yeah, it's a EDH card, but man, this card's getting played in standard. Like this is
Yeah,
a
for
top
sure.
tier reanimation target, and it's a top tier like sneak it in target off like your fight rigging, just top end on the mid range decks,
Yep.
green mid range decks.
Well, and even in like Jund treasure packages using widespread thieving or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can get it out, you can cheat that sucker into play in so many different ways right now. It's kind of ridiculous. Um, yeah, it's not that hard to do, and it's awesome when it works because the amount of value that it gives you is phenomenal. Now, its primary value, the main benefit that it gives you is having a 7/7 reach trampling body. So you gotta have to read the room, know what kind of removal your opponent is running, to know whether or not the shield counter on itself is going to be relevant. But I'll tell you right now, most of the time you want that Rhino token. That 4/4 Rhino is great because if your opponent is even sitting on like a Vanishing Verse or something that can get rid of the Titan, the fact that you still have a 4/4 and you pulled removal out of their hand, you're still doing okay. Like it's not a bad place to be. Much like Obnixilis, the Titan of Industry is just hard to answer. You know, it's just hard to deal with because you just get so much value on that ETB. It's fantastic. So even if your opponent kills it, you're just kind of like, eh. And frankly, if I'm in a Reanimator deck and you kill my Titan, you're doing me a favor because I can just bring it back and get that ETB again. You know, it's great. Yeah,
Definitely.
unless of course it's exiled, but yeah, no, that card's the real deal. It's so much fun. Yeah.
So I mean, essentially, I'm actually pretty happy with what Capenna's done. We're seeing a slash of some of the best cards, which was our top three. But besides that, I think that there's some charms that are getting thrown in there, a few commons and uncommons that are helping with some of the smooth out some of the other decks. But overall, in week one, we're seeing some impact. And going forward, I expect that the more everyone plays Arena, the more that we're seeing these tournaments. This weekend, we're seeing the Metagame Challenge on Arena. So definitely check that out. There's going to be some deck lists all over the internet from that event. So who knows, maybe we'll actually get to see more of like the metagame fleshed out and maybe see even more cards from Capenna making bigger impacts. So
Yeah,
I'm excited about it going forward.
Yeah, me too. And I have to admit, okay, before we kind of move on, I do need to acknowledge that I was actually wrong about one card.
Ooh,
That I
what's
do want
that?
to, and I think a lot of people were wrong about this card. I do need to like issue a public apology, and I've done this on my YouTube channel as well. I have been on the record since the moment the card was printed or moment the card was revealed. I was on the record as saying this is the most garbage piece of trash thing that has ever been printed. It's not even a good
I know what you're
bookmark. Get it out
talking
of here.
about now.
Meeting of the Five. I said like I actually once on my stream said the only thing that card is good for is evening out the legs of a wobbly table. Like that's how bad I thought that card was. Um, I was challenged to build a deck with it. Like one of my viewers challenged me to build a deck with it, and I was like, you know what? Let's do this. Let's give it a try. It's gonna suck. This is gonna be awful. I don't know what you're saying. This is gonna be the worst thing ever. And we actually put together a cabaret Fleetfoot Dancer Ginny Faye Agnes thing. And it worked. It actually worked really well. I'm like, and because you hit a meeting of the five, you get a Fleetfoot Dancer, a crew captain, and an Agnes. And if you have Ginny Faye on the board, all of a sudden you're attacking and you're creating these tap treasure tokens, which are all coming in as hasty casts.
Yeah, they're turning into
Like,
creatures. Yep.
and meeting of the five allows you to hit like 3 spells in one turn off that. And if you have widespread theming down, you might even be able to hit more. And it's one of those things where like watching it once I actually resolved it in a game once, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like now things are happening here. Like way more than I expected. So I think that card is capable of doing some cool stuff in the right shell. Now, the deck building requirements around making it work, oh boy, they are through the roof. And I don't know if there's any other shell where it could work other than this one I put together, but I know there's at least one where it can accomplish its goal. And that's cool. Now, I played a lot of that deck on the ladder. Its win rate is still not great, but like, so I'm not saying take this to the next tournament, but if you want to have some fun on the ladder, it's a neat card to build around, and it's fun to play. It is fun to play. Like if nothing else, it's got that. So I just need to make a shout out there. I was maybe a little too harsh on meeting the five originally.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think the set it's good. It's adding a lot. I still see it adding even more. There's a lot of cards that we haven't seen get played yet, even from our top 10. Little Chat is one of the main ones where no one's really caught on to that yet.
Oh yeah.
Once everybody kind of catches on to that, they'll realize how good it is. But new Capenna already making a big impact, and we'll see where it goes from here. That pretty much actually sums up our news of the week. Somewhat of a lighter news week this week. But yeah, don't forget, we have a tournament starting on the 15th. We'll have that tournament and then 2 other tournaments this month. You can find the links to that in the description below. Those are all free to play. You can find all of Hamhocks content and my content as well down below. And yeah, we're going to have some new videos out here in the next few days with some more drafts and just some more gameplay overall. So if you haven't already and you've enjoyed this video, hit the like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you next time. Stay cheesy.